All right, good morning. I hope everyone's having a good day. We're really excited to have you here and really excited to share today's topic, medical research updates with Dr. Barbara Burton. Before we get started, a couple things. One, we're asking you if you could stay muted for the entire time. If you have questions, please use the chat feature. I will moderate questions. We will get to as many as we can. If any don't get answered, we will make sure they get answered by email or published in our social media channels. But I think we'll have time to get all of them answered. One other thing, we have a really great crowd today, and I actually did a batch geo to show you how many people and from all over actually a couple different countries are joining us today. So not only were we PKU Illinois, but the topic is such interest. We have people, I think, 8 time zones represented. So we're circling a third of the earth. So that's, really excited from our end. First things first, I'm going to introduce our sponsor. Her name is Miriam Altina. Miriam is a territory manager based out of Chicago with Vitaflo USA, a Nestle's health science company. She's also a registered dietitian. Miriam has been with Vitaflo for about 6 years. You may have seen her and spoken with her at various PKU metabolic events in and around Chicago before. Before joining Vitaflo, she practiced as a metabolic dietitian at Lurie Children's. She is grateful to have served the metabolic community in different ways throughout her career and excited to join us. And Miriam, we're excited to have you. So I'm going to stop my share and then allow you to share your screen.
Thank you so much, Grant.
You can see us now. Great. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Thank you to the organization and thank you to Grant for that kind introduction. I am going to share my screen with you so that we can simultaneously see the great information I hope to share with you as far as updates from Vitaflo USA. So bear with me one moment. Perfect. So I am sharing my screen with you so that you may see exactly what I'm sharing and talking with you about. As you can see, Vitaflo USA is a company that provides quite a range and variety of medical food or formula for individuals with inherited metabolic conditions or metabolic conditions. And as well as specialized other areas of nutrition. Specifically, we'll be focusing on PKU today. And as you can see, Vitaflo also offers a range of products for individuals from the age of 6 months and throughout adulthood. Today, we'll be talking specifically about one of our products, PKU Spear, which is the GMP or glycomacropeptide formula option by Vitaflo. I am excited to share with you today that we have a new resource using PKU Spear powder, and it is a new recipe guide. There are several recipes included in this recipe guide. I will be focusing on one specifically. It is the creamy iced coffee. So, what I am going to share with you today is the creamy iced coffee recipe, and hopefully you'll see how easy it is. We'll be using some of your favorite cold brew or iced coffee. We'll need about 3 ounces of that, your preferred alternative rice or coconut or almond creamer, about 1 ounce of that, as well as 1 packet of PKU Spear powder. Specifically, we'll be using the vanilla flavor. PKU Spear comes in 3 available, PKU Spear 20 comes in 3 available flavors, red berry, vanilla, as I just mentioned, as well as chocolate. So to make this super easy, we are using the Spear shaker cup. I've already poured 3 ounces of cold brew in here. We're going to add the ounce of coconut milk as well. This is the coconut milk creamer that perhaps many of you are familiar with. Thankfully, it's something that is easily available and accessible at grocery stores around the country. So we're going to add just 1 ounce of that, and there are line markings on the sphere shaker cup to keep it super easy for you when preparing. We've got our PKU Sphere powder packet, vanilla flavor. I'm going to add that. And the nice thing is that we're working with just 4 ounces or 1/2 cup of volume. So when you're making your formula, you are sticking to what PKU Sphere is kind of known best for, in that it can be mixed to just 4 ounces. And we're going to make sure the lid is nice and tight. Give it a couple of good shakes. And once you've got this nice and mixed, you can very easily just drink directly from the sphere shaker cup, or you could pour over ice and drink that way as well. Very easy. So if perhaps coffee is not your preferred flavor, or perhaps you don't want to stay away from caffeinated beverages, you're welcome to choose from a variety of other options from the Sphere recipe guide. We have several other options that you might be able to see to an extent on my screen now. This new recipe guide is being shared with the clinics, so you can certainly reach out to your clinician to get more information about PKU Sphere, but also this new recipe guide using PKU Sphere powder. And it's on the vitaflowusa.com website. Lastly, 2 things I wanted to share. We're going to have a lot of exciting information coming from Vitaflo in the next several months and several weeks. Specifically new and interesting recipes using PKU Sphere, as well as new low-protein cooking videos by Vitaflo's own Chef Neil, which you can see all of that information as well as new innovations and new products by following Vitaflo on Instagram at the handle of @VitafloUSA, as well as on Facebook by following Vitaflo at the handle of Vitaflo VitaFriends. And lastly, in the Zoom link that you received for this meeting, in that email, you also received a link to this sample request form. This form gives you a visual of all the PKU formula options available from Vitaflo, and you can check what you'd like to perhaps receive a sample of, or you could use the QR code at the top right of this form, scan it using your smartphone, and get directly to the online sample request at Vitaflo USA. Now, the products that we've demonstrated and are featuring here are products that are available in the United States. If there's any questions or any inquiries, we can connect you to your local Vitaflo representative as well. And as an internal policy, we always get authorization from the clinic. So with that, I'd like to thank the organization for inviting me here today, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. I much appreciated. It's a great demonstration. So allow me to put my screen back on. And now with that, and once again, thank you to Vitaflo as well for sponsoring this event. Let's get to Dr. Burton. If you don't know Dr. Burton, Dr. Barbara K. Burton is a professor of pediatrics at the Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine, who served for 20 years as director of the PKU clinic at the Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago. In 2019, she retired for most of her day-to-day clinical responsibilities and is now focused on clinical research. Dr. Burton is an investigator in numerous natural history studies and clinical trials of new therapies for various metabolic disorders. She participated in the clinical trials leading to FDA approval for both Kuvan and Palynziq for treatment of PKU. She is currently an investigator in homology medicines and biomarin gene therapy trials in PKU. She has published over 200 peer-reviewed articles, 50 chapters in books, as an editor of 2 textbooks. Dr. Burton is an active in professional organizations and the past president of the Society for Inherited Metabolic Disorders and the Chicago Pediatric Society. She has served 4 years as a member of the Secretary's Advisory on Hereditable Diseases for Infants and Children, a federal advisory committee that makes recommendations regarding newborn screening, and is in the U.S. and currently serves as the chairman of Newborn Screening Advisory Committee of the Illinois Department of Public Health. She is an emeritus member of the board of directors of the Greater Chicago Area March of Dimes and received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the March of Dimes in 2018, and also received the PKU Hero Award from the National PKU Alliance in 2019, and is a great friend to everyone and kind and gentle and loving. And anyone who's ever interacted with Dr. Barbara Burton comes away liking her more. So with that said, Dr. Burton, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and give you the floor for the next half an hour.
Wow. I mean, that was such a lovely and kind introduction, Grant. Thank you so much. Now you guys know much more than you ever wanted to know about me, but I'm so appreciative of those very kind words. It's such a pleasure to be here today. I think it's such a great idea that the PKU Organization of Illinois is having these Saturday morning sessions to keep us connected during this really unusual time. I'll certainly miss seeing you all at the November meeting. I always look forward to that so much, but hopefully by next year we'll be back together. But I am happy to be able to talk with you today. Let's see if I can get this up and going. All right, are you seeing that? Everything good? Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about some research going on in PKU. I know you're probably really interested in investigational new therapies, but before we get into that, I also wanted to share with you some research that I've been involved with over the past several years related to other medical problems observed in adult patients with PKU, and now we're moving into even studying the same thing in adolescents. And this has been a really interesting experience for me. I hope you'll find this interesting and kind of tantalizing. We certainly need to learn more, but really what we wanted to look at and study was what other medical issues do we see in our patients with PKU as they grow up. We've talked a lot in the past about some of the neurocognitive problems that we can see and psychiatric symptoms and so forth related to the high Phe levels. And this has been looked at in the same way that we did the study I'm going to talk about today. But really what I'm focusing on is more general medical issues. We have observed some over time in our PKU patients. For example, we've known for a long time that PKU patients had more problems with low bone density. So those of you on the call who have PKU, who've come to our clinic or some of the other clinics, as you get into adolescence, you know, we start looking at this with DEXA scans, bone density scans, and so forth. We've also suspected that we see some issues with the GI tract, maybe related to the diet, but this has not ever been really thoroughly studied. So this is what we wanted to do, and this was sponsored by BioMarin. I was involved with a group of other PKU physicians, and we were looking at this in a really interesting way, and that is through utilization of U.S. health insurance claims databases. It turns out that there is a big database that includes all of the information from any health insurance claims, both commercial and governmental funded, so Medicaid. And so we can look in that database and find patients who have been seen at all during the time period of the study with a diagnosis of PKU, and also look at all of the other things that have been diagnosed in them. When you go to the doctor and that doctor enters a charge to your insurance company, they have to put in the diagnosis that they're seeing you for, and what the service was that was provided. And those diagnoses are entered in the form of codes. There are codes that, there's a code for PKU, there are codes for virtually every condition you might be treated for, although some of them are lumped together, as you'll see. So what we did in this study is first we looked at that database for who's in there. Do we find patients with PKU? And sure enough, we found 3,691 adults with PKU, and then we matched them with patients from the general population, because we not only wanted to see what conditions we were observing in PKU, but were they just the same as people who don't have PKU, or more common or less common than other people. So for every PKU patient, there were 5 patients selected from the general population who were of the same age and the same gender. So we tried to match the patients. And I'm going to show you what we found here in this study, which has actually been presented already at a medical meeting. So what we're looking at are the 50 most common other conditions other than PKU seen in patients with PKU. And you can see the top of the list. First of all, just to show you what this graph means, you're probably not used to looking at things like this. Here you have what the condition is listed here. And over on the right, you see what's called a prevalence ratio. And so if we just look at the one at the top, for example, this disorders of fluid, electrolyte, and acid-base balance, we see move down here with the dot that the prevalence ratio is about 2.5. What that means is that this was the most common thing seen in PKU, and it was 2.5 times more common in PKU than in the general population. These black bars just represent the statistical confidence interval around that estimate of the increased risk. So if it doesn't cross 1, then this is certainly statistically significant. So you can see that, whoops, my finger's a little twitchy. You can see that everything on this slide is significantly more common in the PKU patients than in the patients in the general population. Now, this one at the very top, disorders of fluid, electrolyte, and acid-base balance, we're going to have to dig into that a little bit more, because that covers a group of conditions. It could be dehydration, it could be problems with your certain blood tests, with your sodium level, your potassium level, it could be metabolic acidosis. There are a variety of things included in there. Interesting thing, the next one on the line is overweight or obesity. And we've kind of had a debate about this over the years. Is it more common in PKU? Well, it is. I mean, it's common in the general population, but here it was over twice as common in the patients with PKU. And then the third one on the list is really interesting, and that's diabetes. We found that patients with PKU were twice as likely to have diabetes than patients in the general population. And that's not something we have previously appreciated. And we'll talk in a little bit more detail in a minute about, some ideas of what may go into this and what we need to do to really understand it a little bit better. Some of the things we found are a little puzzling and may not be truly reliable observations. For example, normal delivery, more common. But we don't really think that women with PKU are having more deliveries than, women without PKU. So it's a little unclear why this one turned up. And then there are a lot of miscellaneous things that come up on the list, but I'll point out very prominently we have a lot of GI disorders. Functional digestive disorders not elsewhere classified. Well, that would include things like irritable bowel syndrome, gastritis, duodenitis are here. Disorders, whoops, it's that twitchy finger again. Disorders of the esophagus like reflux, esophagitis. So a lot of GI things, and we've certainly observed this in clinical practice. Other disorders of bone and cartilage, that may be where some of our osteopenia is coming in, although that has its own code. And then down here, disorders of lipid metabolism, which will become important in a minute. And then here's the rest of the top 50. And you can see that with very few exceptions, everything is more common in PKU than in the general population. The only ones that were the same are the ones in black at the bottom. Some female disorders of the female reproductive tract, sprains and strains of the back, drug abuse. And in another study, we actually found that alcohol and drug abuse are less common in patients with PKU. So that's something, you know, certainly that doesn't seem to be any more prevalent for sure in our patients with PKU. Now, a similar study was done in Germany, which we can compare, you know, to a certain extent. They were using a slightly different coding system than we use, but still we found that 23 of the top 50 conditions in our U.S. study were also in the top 50 in the German study. And that included some of the big ones, like these disorders of fluid electrolyte and acid-base balance, overweight and obesity, again, diabetes, again, GI disorders, gastritis, esophagitis, colitis, and again, disorders of lipid metabolism. Now, disorders of lipid metabolism could include things like high cholesterol levels, high triglycerides, things of that nature. And there could be some relationship between some of these things. So when we stop to think about why are these things more common in the PKU patient, we have to think about. I mean, one is patients with PKU may just get more medical care than other people. Because they have PKU, they're seen more, maybe they're referred more, maybe they get more scrutiny, and so, you know, they're more likely to see a doctor for certain conditions than patients who don't have PKU. I mean, that's certainly possible for some of the disorders, some of the milder things particularly, where maybe in the general population you might not go to the doctor. It doesn't really explain something like diabetes, but certainly for some of the conditions it may just be that patients get more health care. But if we have conditions that are more common, then we have to ask ourselves, well, is it caused by the disorder? Is it caused by the diet? Or is there some other explanation? For example, is there an interrelationship that maybe the PKU diet causes more obesity, and in turn the obesity is the risk factor that causes more diabetes? We certainly know there's a relationship between those two. So there's no question that we need to dig into this a little bit more. We need to learn more. You know, then we need to think about how do we best monitor our patients for these complications, and how do we prevent them if we can prevent them. So we're just in the early stages of getting into this, and I think you all recognize that early on in PKU care, we're really just focusing on controlling the PKU and keeping the Phe levels in check and getting a good outcome as far as brain development, neurologic development, and then maintaining that over time to prevent the sequelae of the high Phe levels that can come up later on the brain. And all of that is, of course, critically important. But now we can't ignore the rest of the patient. And now we're having just an increasing population of adult patients with PKU because of newborn screening. Now our patients moving into middle age, and we're starting to see more, and we really need to understand it and know what to expect for the lifespan of the patient and how do we optimize their health in every respect. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that at the end, but I want to move on now and talk a little bit about new therapies in development. Of course, you all lived through, the Kuvan development. Palynziq are two approved drugs for the treatment of PKU over the years, and now we have many patients who are benefiting from treatments, from use of those medications. So we're no longer limited just to dietary therapy in PKU, although for many patients, dietary therapy remains very important. But there are a whole host of other new options being investigated in clinical trials, or if not yet in clinical trials, being looked at by pharmaceutical companies in the preclinical setting, in animal studies, laboratory studies, hoping that soon they will be in clinical trials. And these are the main ones I'm going to touch on here. There's a drug called Sepiapterin in clinical trials. You know gene therapy trials are out there. There is a probiotic being developed to break down Phe in the gut. There is also an oral form of the enzyme phenylalanine ammonia lyase. That's the active ingredient in Palynziq being developed. And finally, something called mRNA therapy. So first, let's start with Sepiapterin. What is Sepiapterin? It is a precursor of BH4, which if you've listened to any of the talks on Kuvan, you know is basically what Kuvan is. And BH4 is what we call a cofactor in the phenylalanine hydroxylase reaction. You know that the problem in PKU is that you don't have enough phenylalanine hydroxylase, or the phenylalanine hydroxylase that you have is not working properly. So you can't do the normal conversion of phenylalanine to tyrosine. Well, that enzyme, phenylalanine hydroxylase, or PAH, uses BH4 as a helper. It only works in the presence of BH4. And patients who respond to Kuvan have mutations that somehow affect the binding of the BH4 to the enzyme, or create misfolding, which can be corrected by BH4. So that's why we have some patients with PKU, PAH deficiency, who respond to getting more of this BH4 in their body than their body normally synthesizes. That's Kuvan. That's how Kuvan works. Now, Sepiapterin is a substance that is converted in the body to BH4. It is being developed as a therapeutic by a company called Sensa Pharmaceuticals, which is owned by another one called PTC Therapeutics. It has been in the clinic, and the early data suggests that it may be more effective than Kuvan in lowering blood Phe levels. And the reason for this would be greater bioavailability. Only a certain fraction of the Sepiapterin, or the Kuvan, that you take in is actually absorbed and works. That's what we mean by bioavailability. There's only a certain amount that gets into your cells and can do the function. And it is thought that Sepiapterin may be more bioavailable. It also crosses the blood-brain barrier, which Kuvan does not do. That's not really important for PKU because all the action in PKU is in the liver, but it may be important for a related group of conditions that are rare, but which we see in our PKU clinics, called BH4 deficiency. And every time a baby has a positive newborn screening test for PKU, we make sure that they don't have this related condition of BH4 deficiency, which is much more difficult to treat and involves much more than just dietary modification or control of blood Phe levels. So this product may be helpful for those patients as well. It's in clinical trials. We're not involved in the trials, but it is being actively investigated in other PKU clinics. The other thing I'll just mention about Kuvan, in case some of you may not be aware, is that in October there will be a generic form of Kuvan available. It's not clear yet how that's going to, impact our patients, what fraction of the patients will go on to the generic form, if payers will require that, but that will be available beginning in October. And our expectation is that it would work exactly the same as, BioMarin's product, Kuvan. Won't be called Kuvan. It's a generic form of Sepiapterin, which is the other name for that drug. Okay, let's move on to gene therapy. So what do we mean by gene therapy? Well, what happens in gene therapy is that you're introducing copies of the healthy PAH gene into people who have PKU, where both of their genes for the production of that PAH enzyme are altered. That's the genetic defect in PKU, is mutations or alterations in the PAH gene. So the idea is, if you can give the patient back normal, healthy copies of that gene, then they can make PAH that's functional and correct the effects of their PKU. So how do you get those normal gene copies into the body? They're introduced into the body in what's called a vector. That's something that takes it into the body. And typically in most gene therapy trials now, and in the two that are ongoing in PKU, this is using a viral vector. And these are viruses that are known not to cause disease in humans. We know they can get into the cells, but they don't cause, they're not like the influenza virus or coronavirus. They don't cause clinical disease. And the ones that are commonly used are called AAV, or adeno-associated viruses, and there are a variety of different subtypes of those. So the healthy genes are put into these viral vectors, and then they are given to the patient. The hope is that they go to the liver of the patient. So they're targeted to go to the liver, because in PKU, this is where all of that conversion of Phe to tyrosine occurs. And hopefully this will modify the course of the disease. The two gene therapy trials that are currently in the clinic are sponsored by BioMarin and a company called Homology Medicines. The goal of gene therapy for PKU is long-term control of the blood phenylalanine level without the need for dietary therapy or other interventions. Patients hope, of course, that gene therapy is going to be a cure, basically make the PKU go away. The reality is we don't know with any gene therapy how long it's going to last, if indeed it does work, but certainly the hope is that it would provide long-term control over a period of years. Since these clinical trials are just beginning, we don't yet know if they'll be successful, again, how long it will last, if it is successful, or if there will be side effects that are not currently anticipated. Gene therapy trials, like virtually all of our other clinical research, not just in PKU, but in every disease, has been slowed down quite a bit by the COVID situation, because there was a period of time at many institutions where new patients could not be enrolled in clinical trials. I think now most centers have got that figured out. We know ways that we can do it safely and protect patients. So things are cooking along again, but certainly things were delayed in many cases because of this. So again, how would it work? Well, the idea is to put that normal gene for PAH, or phenylalanine hydroxylase, into the AAV vector, Then virus, the vector containing the normal genes, is given to the patient intravenously, and the virus enters some liver cells. And within those cells, the genes form stable structures called episomes, and they begin making the PAH, which can convert Phe to tyrosine. In any gene therapy trial, medication is required to suppress the immune system in the early weeks to months following treatment to prevent the body's immune system from attacking and killing the virus or killing the cells containing the virus in the body. We want, our immune system recognizes foreign things as foreign, tries to get rid of it. So that process needs to be suppressed until this is entrenched. Okay, so that's how gene therapy works. Again, we don't have any information to share yet on whether it works or not, but these trials are ongoing. So the next thing I'd like to touch on is the probiotic for the treatment of PKU. I think many of you know what probiotics are probably. They're sold over the counter. They're used for a lot of different reasons, but basically they are preparations of healthy bacteria. We know that our GI tract is loaded with bacteria that live there, and many of them serve an important healthy function in our body. And so this probiotic, which is being developed by a company called Synlogic, utilizes a probiotic bacteria, a form of E. coli that's used in over-the-counter probiotic preparations sold very commonly in Europe. And they take that probiotic bacteria and engineer it so that it's very good at breaking down phenylalanine. And they do that by putting into the bacteria two different metabolic pathways. One is the PAL, phenylalanine ammonia lyase, same thing that's in Palynziq, that can break down Phe. And then there's a second metabolic pathway. So there are multiple mechanisms by which these bacteria can break down the Phe that's eaten in the diet and keep it from getting into the bloodstream. Similarly, or in addition, there is some circulation of phenylalanine from the bloodstream into the lumen of the gut. So it may be that these bacteria also could break down some of the Phe already in the blood. Now, this is, again, already in clinical trials. They've finished what's called a phase 1 trial, which is primarily looking at safety, and they're entering now into a phase 2 trial. And the way it works is that the probiotic is supplied as a powder, which can be mixed with a beverage. It's taken 3 or more times a day with the meals. And like I said, it is designed to break down the Phe in the intestine before it gets into the bloodstream, as well as some of that Phe that circulates between the bloodstream and the gut. One of the good things about this is it's not absorbed, so side effects really should be limited to the GI tract. We don't expect with this to see any sort of systemic side effects. And in the clinical trials thus far, the main side effect that was seen at high doses is nausea. So there is a limit to how much of this bacteria can be given without producing nausea, and that will be the limitation on how much efficacy we can see in terms of breaking down Phe. The bacteria are designed such that they don't live forever in the gut after you give them, which is viewed as a good thing because, what if you had so many in there that they broke down all the Phe and, your Phe level was constantly low? We don't want that. So it does have to be given multiple times a day. We think that if this works out well, it will probably be something along the lines of Kuvan, in terms of its efficacy. It's not going to be a standalone treatment for PKU like Palynziq can be, for example, but it should be something we could use in children because of the safety aspect of it, and would be a great thing for children, for example, who are not Kuvan responsive. Would give us more dietary liberalization, give us lowering of the Phe level, and that's of course assuming that it works, as well as the projections from the company suggest. But again, still relatively early in the clinical trials to know whether this is going to be something that's likely really to come into our mainstream clinical care. Okay, then the next thing I want to mention is the oral form of PAL, or phenylalanine ammonia lyase. This is the enzyme that is deficient in, that is present in the Palynziq, not normally present in humans. So phenylalanine ammonia lyase, this product is being developed as a combined effort of two companies, one called Codexis and the other Nestle Health Science, which actually is the mother company of Vitaflo, where Miriam works. And it is oral. And so how could this work? We know that normally when we ingest proteins, and PAL is a protein, it's an enzyme, so it is a protein. Normally when we ingest proteins, they're digested and broken down in the GI tract. So we can't just give the kind of PAL that's used in Palynziq. It actually was tried orally and wasn't efficacious. And this is one of the reasons. They're broken down, and so they don't get into the bloodstream, they don't get into the body, can't be efficacious. But this form of PAL has been altered by having mutations knocked in, mutations actually put into the protein to make it resistant to digestion and give it optimal activity. That's the expertise of this company, Codexis. They knock in mutations to make things more effective or resistant to various things, and have done it in industry and a lot of other settings. And then the idea is that the PAL, again, can work in the GI tract, break down the Phe, and also deal with some of that circulation of Phe coming from the bloodstream. It should avoid the side effects that we see with Palynziq, or our injectable form of PAL, because the body's immune system doesn't typically react to things that we eat and that don't enter the bloodstream, that they're protected from immunologic attack. So that's the idea behind it. It's not yet in clinical trials. Hopefully sometime in 2021, those clinical trials will be initiated, but it will be interesting to see for sure how this works out as it's brought into humans. And then the final thing I want to mention is messenger RNA, or mRNA therapy, which is being developed for PKU and for a lot of other indications by a company called Moderna. And here is a little information about what we mean by mRNA therapy. You know that our genes, which are, all of our genetic information, they are comprised of a chemical called DNA. So DNA makes up our genes. So our genes for phenylalanine hydroxylase, or PAH, are made out of DNA, and there's an alteration in that DNA that produces PKU. Now, when a gene talks to the body, to tell it what to make, so for example, to make PAH, the way it does that is first the DNA acts as a template, and another chemical called messenger RNA is made. And that messenger RNA actually has the instructions for making the protein. the PAH protein. So from that mRNA, you get the protein, in this case, the PAH. Genes are forever. So they are in your cells, they're there forever. mRNA is made and has a relatively short life. It's broken down and then more mRNA is continuously made. So it's a little different that way. So the idea behind mRNA therapy is instead of giving the genes to the patient, you're giving the mRNA, the normal mRNA that tells the body how to make PAH. There would be a lot of differences between gene therapy and mRNA therapy, even though the goal of both of them is for the body to make its own normal form of PAH to correct the PKU. One difference is that gene therapy is given only once. The idea is you give it, you give enough to get into the liver cells, and then it stays there, and it has long-lasting efficacy because those genes, last a long time. They live a long time, basically. And right now, you can only give it once because a virus is being used to bring the genes in. Typically, patients make antibodies to that virus that would not allow them to, again, receive treatment with the same vector. Now, that may change over time if ways are identified to allow redosing. But right now, the idea is gene therapy is given only once, whereas mRNA would have to be given periodically because, like I mentioned, mRNA has a short half-life. It's broken down. So you would have to give it periodically, probably every few weeks. They both could be given by IV. You might be able to do mRNA by subcutaneous injection like we do with Palynziq. But these would not be oral therapies, either of them. And that whole issue of a single dose versus repeated dosing has both pluses and minuses. Obviously, it's nice if you only have to get a single dose and then it works for years, maybe indefinitely, maybe for a few years, but for a long time. That would be fantastic. But on the other hand, if it isn't exactly the right dose for you, then you're kind of done. Whereas with mRNA, doing it multiple times, if the dose is too low or too high, the dose could be adjusted to meet the needs of the individual patient. Similarly, if you find a serious side effect in a patient, well, you can't take gene therapy away. You can't take it out once it's in there. Whereas mRNA, of course, you can stop it, and the mRNA will be broken down. It'll be out of the body in a fairly short period of time. So there are differences. Like I mentioned, this mRNA is also not yet in the clinic, but again, hopefully within the next year or so, we will see clinical trials beginning with this one. So the ones really in the clinic currently, Sepiapterin, gene therapy, and also the probiotic. Now, this changes all the time. There's new developments, new things come up. So if you ever want to keep track on your own of what's going on with clinical trials in PKU, there's a website you can go to, www.clinicaltrials.gov, where you'll find listed every pharmaceutical-sponsored clinical trial for everything, as well as all clinical trials that are funded by the National Institutes of Health, our major federal funding agency also have to be listed on there. And you can search by disease, so you can just search under PKU, and then if you don't want to see everything in there that has anything to do with PKU, you just want to see what, say, BioMarin is doing. You could add that in there, and it'll just give you any trials they're sponsoring. Or if you just want to see gene therapy, put that in there, and you'll see any of the gene therapy trials. Tells you a little bit about the trial, tells you where you can go for further information. What are the sites that are participating in the trials? And then typically there's contact information for those trials. If you've got any other condition or family members, this is also a place you can go to look up, clinical trials for some rare type of cancer or really any kind of condition. If you want any information about clinical trials we are doing at Lurie, right now we're involved in the gene therapy trials. We expect to be involved in the also in the Nestle Codexis trial of the oral PAL. You may get in touch with me at any time. You can email me. I'm always on email at my email address here. Or if you have any questions about anything I've said that we didn't have time to get to in the Q&A today, feel free to get in touch with me as well. Or you can call our office and ask to speak to a member of the PKU research team. And the phone number is given on the screen. So it's been great chatting with you this morning. It's great to see the names of some of my patients out there. Hello to all of you. And I hope you all have a great weekend and stay safe, and that we'll be together again soon. So at this point, I am happy to answer any questions, Grant, if you found any in the chat room.
There isn't any yet, but we'll give it a minute. If anyone has a question, go into the chat and type it up. You were pretty comprehensive, Dr. Burton. There might not be any questions.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. Or like I said, if you're shy about it, you don't want to, he won't say who put in the question, so you can answer them anonymously. If you have one, don't be shy. But you can also get in touch with me, offline, anytime.
No, there's none. If you could unshare your screen, I have one more thing.
I certainly can. Let's see.
All right. So before I go any further, Dr. Burton, thank you so much for spending the time with us. We really, really appreciate it. It was great.
It is my pleasure every time. So ask me again.
It was wonderful to see. A lot I didn't even know about, and I'm on the board. Good. So thank you. Our next item is the next event we're having. And if you can see my screen, it's New Parent Cafe. And we're presenting it. It's sponsored by Vitaflo and Cambrook, Galen Pharma, and Nutricia. This won't be the same format as what we've done the last 2 weeks of just having a speaker. This will be much more engaging and a way for anyone to answer questions and ask questions. We'll meet vendors. We'll talk to dietitians. We'll have them here. You can just do an Ask Us Anything. I highly recommend, since space isn't an issue, if you have grandparents or aunts and uncles or caregivers who are around your children, to invite them to come as well, and they can get their questions answered, because you will, if you're new, if you have a child who's perhaps 5 and under, please come to this event and tell anyone who interacts with that child to do the same. They'll all learn a lot, and you'll learn what the vendors are up to these days, and you get a chance to talk to dietitians in a much more comfortable environment. So we highly recommend you come. We'll be sending out an email. Anyone who gets the email is invited. Obviously, this not just Illinois, it can be for anybody. Just a lot of thank yous coming in, Dr. Burton, nothing else.
Okay, good.
This is actually from the PKU Organization of Ireland, thanking us for having the event. So
wow.
Doctor, you're intercontinental now.
Awesome. I mean, isn't it the miracle of technology?
Yeah,
wow.
Bring us all together. So everyone who attended, thank you very much. Once I convert this to a video, I will put it on our YouTube page, and we will share it via social media and email it to everyone. You will receive an email about New Parent Cafe registration, or you can go to our website, pkuil.org, go to the events page, and you can register from there as well. That's it. Have a great rest of the day. As Dr. Burton said, stay safe. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.